Good morning. Welcome.
Morning.
My name is Tolisile Mkhwanazi. I'll be your MC this morning and have the pleasure of introducing these wonderful speakers as well. I'll hand over shortly to Judith, but maybe I'll just begin by running us through today's program. We will begin with the fireside chat, reflections from Tasneem, and then we'll break a little bit at 11 for brunch. We'll then come back for a masterclass, which is much anticipated as well. And then we'll conclude at 12:30. So Judith, I'd like to hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chloe, and welcome to the fourth event of Women on Boards. We are just so thrilled to be running this again. So just want to inform you that we obviously have got people online. Please feel free to send in your comments. We don't want you to feel left out. We will take a break. Obviously, you'll see there won't be any activities, but we hope that you can come back. So we'll get right into it because we want to stick to time. It's Saturday morning. But I just really want to applaud you women too for taking time once a week, once a month on a Saturday to come and be with us, to get inspired, to share, and really just help all of us to get ahead in this journey. I'm so excited that today we have Tasneem, who I had the privilege of working with during my time at ABSA. And we're going to delve into, just her journey. But her topic's really interesting. Actually, what I wanted to also confirm was that the topic has changed a little bit. It's a now uncompromising adaptability. That's what she's going to talk about. And it kind of sounds like a bit of a... It's uncompromising, but you're adapting. So I'm so looking forward to it. So ladies, let's keep the conversation going. Feel free. We want you to share your thoughts, share your ideas. This is an interactive session. So we'll get right into it. So Polly, maybe you can just do a quick intro of Tasneem, and then we'll start.
Sure. So Tasneem is a chartered accountant, and she served as an independent non-executive director for the past 10 years. She currently serves on the board of ABSA Group Limited, ABSA Bank Limited, Renault Limited, and Bidcorp Limited, where she chairs various committees. She's recently retired as the chair of the ABSA Financial Services Board. Prior to this, she was an audit partner at Deloitte and a former member of the Deloitte South Africa board. Between 2003 and 2006, Tasneem was a postgraduate lecturer in auditing at the University of Witwatersrand. So welcome, Tasneem.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thanks.
So Tasneem, this is going to be a conversation. You see, it's kind of cool. We've got a fire behind us. Yeah. So even if we've got an interesting topic and compromising adaptability, I think we're just going to let it flow and just really talk to your journey as a board member. But before we start, I just want to reflect and think about my time and how I felt being exposed to Tasneem and how she showed up in the boardroom. And Tasneem, we've been covering a number of topics, but the one thing that has come out quite frequently is women just showing up and being yourself, not trying to be anybody else, not trying to be a man, not trying to... And I must say that really came out so strongly, and I appreciate that. Because Tasneem is, I think, not a very kind of noisy person, so to speak, not very, but in her kind of calm demeanor, she was very effective. And I just want to bring that up to say, you don't have to diminish anybody to be effective. Tasneem didn't diminish anybody, but has been so effective in her role as a manager exec. That's how I experienced it. So I just want to applaud you for that.
Thanks,
I really do. Okay, so obviously we want to hear your story, Tasneem. Yep. Your topic is really interesting. It's a bit of a paradox.
Yeah.
So where do you want to start? I mean, how do you balance those two things. I mean, you're adaptable, but you're unwavering at the same time.
No, thanks. Well, firstly, thank you for inviting me here today. It really is such a pleasure and privilege to sit amongst ladies, and I'm not sure if there are men on the call, so let me, it's really to be a privilege to be here, and it's a great venue and location, so really thank you. And when Judith said fireside chat, I didn't think there would literally be a fireside. So for those that are online, really there is. So yeah, let me just delve right into it. So firstly, I want to talk about uncompromising adaptability and the paradox that it appears to be, but I do want to then link it to how it allows us to arrive and thrive in boardrooms. And so I want to try and just link that. So I mean, you're absolutely right, Judith. It does seem like a contradiction, right? Adaptability is the capacity to adjust and evolve in response to changing circumstances. And obviously being uncompromising sometimes is a negative connotation. It's just being steadfast or being totally just unchanging. So where it has kind of reflected in my career is, and I'll talk through some of the sort of changes that I've had to adapt to, but it's about being able to be agile, but still understanding what your almost North Star is, what is your principled kind of values system in your life is, and don't waver on that. And that's kind of how I want to talk about sort of today and how that's.
That's great. That's great. So obviously, careers don't take a linear path. And yet we kind of, when we wake up in the morning, we think, oh, I'm going to have a great day and everything's going to work this way. Talk to us about how your career kind of has evolved and how, how did it go? Obviously, it wasn't linear.
Yeah. No, thanks. And so, Judith and I had a bit of a pre-chat, in preparation, I guess, for today. And I think you weren't even aware, Judith, of this almost non-linear journey that I had to traverse. And why non-linear? And, I am married, and I got married at a young age. And my husband is also a professional. And so we needed to make some choices early in our lives. Now, obviously, my story is very different to everyone else's story, and we all will have different journeys. But it's about how I navigated, I guess, the things that were sort of, I wouldn't say thrown at me, but it sort of, impacted my career. So, being two young professionals at the time, we had to make some choices, various choices about sometimes who was going to take, I guess, a lead in the household in terms of career progression and who may not take a lead at a time. It's not about this is going to be who you define for the rest of your life. And so these are the kind of factors in my mind that allowed for the adaptability. So first it was my progression into obviously the firm. And then, then we decided to have children later in our lives. And it's about the complexity that having, being young and having young kids kind of adds to a dynamic and a marriage and a household and not necessarily having the right support structures. And so the choices then that one makes, still keeping true to your career objectives and your aspirations. And that's kind of where the sort of adaptability started.
So I would imagine, obviously, a household with two powerful professionals and things.
Oh, we weren't powerful. Well, I young 20s, two kind of just hanging on, right?
Ambitious professionals, obviously getting on. There might have been some instances where potentially there were conflicts where you needed to do, kind of progress, and then he also needed to progress. How do you kind of navigate a situation like that?
Look, I mean, it's all about learning and negotiating and, being transparent in, I guess, your aspirations as well. So like I said, there are no obvious rights and wrongs about, who's going to take what backseat, take a backseat at which point in one's career.
Right.
And I can tell you that at different phases in our careers, although it may not seem to be, but actually I wasn't always taking the back seat.
Right.
So there is that bit of compromise that happens in a negotiated outcome.
So obviously negotiation skills come into play quite strongly. We also have noted that obviously board members come and go. They kind of sometimes take a back step, or even in the career path, you kind of sometimes have to compromise to the point that you kind of take a detour, if I can use that word. Are there any instances in your journey where you had to kind of take a side step or take a detour or take a back step and let somebody else kind of lead that? Because it's a difficult dynamic. Sometimes you kind of think, oh, but I can compromise myself at the expense of someone. Did you have anything like that? And how did you navigate it?
Yeah, but see, Judith, you're calling it a compromise, and I'm talking about it's being uncompromising. So you've got to understand what is it that you want to be true to.
Yeah.
And so when you do take a back step or a side step, it's not because you're compromising something. It's about you adapting to evolve differently for a different outcome. I know it sounds truly paradoxical, but it's not compromising, because I'm not going to give up something for something else or for someone else or to allow for the context to change, etc. It's about just changing and evolving to help yourself be a better in terms of the next step or whatever it might be. We can go through kind of examples of what I mean by that.
Yes, that would be nice. If you've got a specific example that you can share.
So when I was at Deloitte, actually at the time, and like I said, I had my young kids, and I realized for myself, it was a personal thing that I could not cope having, and I had 3 kids in 4 years.
Wow.
So because I wanted to almost get it over and done with as quickly as possible. It was important to me, but my career was also important to me. And so my adaptation at some point was when I realized that, well, we didn't have that many role model females at the firm at the time that could balance all of these things. And so for me, what was important was my career, but I could not cope. And again, in personal matter, because we didn't have the right support structures in place, etc. So I chose to leave the firm and go and lecture at university for about 3-4 years. And what that allowed me to do is evolve, keeping true to my profession, allowing me to grow academically, and then use that at a later stage to come back to the firm, better equipped, to better service, I guess, and to better pursue my career in a different manner. So that's not compromising myself or compromising my career. It's adapting my career.
So what I'm getting is really about the perspective that one takes, when you kind of take a side step. I'm not going to call it a back step because it's a side step, right?
Well, that was, sorry, Judy. It was slightly side and back.
Okay.
Back because, I was getting half my kind of, like what I knew I would probably get at the firm.
Right.
And I knew that my colleagues at my sort of category or my grade, we're going to progress faster. So I knew that when I come back to, if I came back to the firm, that I would not necessarily be at their level. It's funny how these things actually, transpire. I actually happened to come back in at the same level, but again, I went fully conscious that was going to happen.
That's brilliant. I mean, a takeaway for me is, I think, when you mentioned the additional knowledge that you got. So in the side step, there are opportunities there, right? But I think sometimes when you kind of look at it in a negative way, you lose the opportunity, you lose the learning, you lose the value that you probably would have had. So thanks for that. Yeah. So obviously, coming from a conservative kind of background, and now you're this exec in Deloitte and moving around. And how did you balance those two dynamics? Because a lot of us women come from a very conservative background, and yet you have to show up strong and professional. And how did you manage that?
With a lot of difficulty. And up until now, with a lot of difficulty, there's still an expectation of, I guess, the broader family as to how you should show up.
Yeah.
Privately and personally, very different to how you show up professionally. So, look, but it's something I've learned to accept that, you just be true to yourself, true to myself in my workplace. I don't need to demonstrate that, if you want to call it power or whatever it might be, in a personal, in a family environment. And so therefore I'm to some extent, although I'm saying sort of being true to yourself and be authentic, but there is this element of, your behaviors can sometimes need to be sit in some places.
Right.
So you don't need to be in your family home and say, "Oh, well, I've had this hectic day and I've dealt with so and so and throw names." That's not really what you should be doing. So that's how I've learned to accept that. But I want to talk about this comment you made earlier, Judith, about your experience of me on the board. And it was just, as you talked about it, I was just thinking about this idea that we as women, or all board members, feel like they need to be the loudest in the board, the one with the most ideas. And actually, that's not necessarily the case. You often see that the ones that are most effective are the ones that actually are, lead with limited comments. But they the stickiest comments, and they're the most impactful and meaningful comments.
Right.
And I know, because I'm on boards now for 10 years, but when you start off, you feel like you need to be heard, you need to be seen, and you need to be remembered.
Right.
But that's not how you are remembered if you keep talking and throwing ideas, and it's about that meaningful comment. So talk less, be more meaningful, and be more impactful.
Yeah, that's a big one, because I think obviously we as women, you want to be more visible. So that really is a great kind of insight to say it's not about the quantity, but it's the quality of the contribution. And just a comment around the misconception around serving on boards. I think that's a big one, because people feel like, oh, you just need to show up and talk a lot. But meantime, it's maybe just share a little bit about what the misconceptions are sometimes of what it is actually to serve on a board.
I mean, I know I get challenged from family members as well, that, oh, they think I'm just retired. I'm often called the housewife, because I just sit on boards. And there is this misconception that we just all gather around in a table and have tea and coffee and then have lunch afterwards. But I mean, obviously, there's a huge amount of prep that happens prior to the meetings, and not just reading the packs. It's about, doing other research to support either comments or thoughts that you may have, or ideas that you may want to, discuss at a board meeting. So, I mean, Judith would know the amount of the volume of the packs that we have at some of our boards. But it's the prep for that, and so it is quite intense. And then it's the if you're chairing committees or chairing subcommittees, then it's about pre-engagements with management as well, to hear about how they want to land the messages. I mean, obviously, you're not going to change the sort of information they're going to be presenting, but about what they need to focus on, what you think that could be most impactful in terms of change in the business. And so ask them to focus on because you've got sometimes between a 4 to 8 hour meeting, and you want to get the best value out of that meeting. So all of that happens. And then you still do a follow-up, if you're chair of committees, to follow up that management are actually implementing changes, so that you don't get to the next board meeting or subcommittee meeting and then things are falling through the wayside. So it's a lot of background work without being too operational. So there's also that fine balance.
Yeah, and if I just reflect on how I think I experienced Tasneem as being a chairman of the AFS board, and maybe the bigger role of being the group audit committee chairperson, is just the amount of time it takes to prep. Because the more prepared, the better the quality of the conversations, the easier it is to arrive at, because you've kind of done a lot of the digging deep. So any kind of insights around that, Tasneem?
Just diligence, perseverance. But also enjoy your work. So, I mean, I show up every day for my work because I genuinely enjoy it. I'm not there, honestly, and that's just something I think I want to land. I'm not there for the status. We're definitely not there for the money. Of course, we make good money as some board members. Not all boards make good money. But I could make better money if I was doing an executive role. So I really am doing it for the love of what I do.
Right.
And I do it because I want to give back in some shape or form. And I want to continue to grow my career, and I want to continuously learn. So this is the only reason that I do it. And if you enter a board knowing that that's your objectives, then I think you will succeed. I see a number of young board people contact me wanting to be on boards, and they think it's the status. They think it's about growing, and it's really, look, it can be about status if you post things. And honestly, I'm not. So I don't have social media.
Yeah.
I've had people that challenge me on that as well. They go, oh, you need to. So this is very rare for me to be in a circumstance like this, chatting to you, Judith, and your colleagues, because I don't normally like these public forums.
Right.
But it's because I don't like people thinking that this is all about status. It really isn't. Yeah.
Right. I mean, we say, I serve on this board, right? And people say that mindlessly most of the time. How has that labor of love been for you?
No,
From
absolutely.
because like group audit, they'll have a pack with 1,000 pages, right? Just talk to us about it.
So interesting you asked that, because I think, as Koli mentioned and Judith mentioned, I've just retired off the Financial Services Board, which is the insurance board, where I met Judith. And in fact, just last week, I had a cocktail function just where the board members and management just thanked me for my service.
Yes.
And in fact, in there, and I wanted a casual event, I didn't want a formal dinner. And so in that little cocktail event, we had some management and board members speak, our new chair speak. And in fact, I must say, and by saying it, I guess it takes it away, but what resonated with me were the words that they used. They actually said, they thanked me for being a servant to the organization. And that's exactly how I honestly didn't think about it consciously, but because they said it, it resonated with me, because I genuinely do this for the love of it. And maybe I'm going to just take you straight on to, because people must be wondering, why on earth am I talking about adaptability and uncompromising adaptability? Yeah. So one of the reasons maybe that you'll probably understand that is, I don't live in South Africa anymore. I'm not sure if your colleague.
No, I think you must tell the story.
So I actually live in Canada. And I've been living in Canada for 2 years now. And so that's part of the adaptability. So 2 years ago, my husband came to me and said, oops, I have an opportunity to move to Canada to take on a role. What do you think about it? And I just thought, oh dear, there I go. I mean, I've built up my career, and there's I think I'm going to have to start all over again, or we need to start thinking about kind of options. When I went and spoke to some of my board chairs, and they were all comfortable to support the fact that I could live in Canada and do my various roles, which was really, I'm very grateful for that. But what does that mean? So that means that sometimes I'm up at 1 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning because of 6-7 hour time zone differences, doing board meetings. I can tell you, you only do that if you love your work. Because if you convert rands to dollars, this is definitely not impactful. Right. So you do it for the love of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Wow, that's brilliant. And then obviously just the gravitas that one needs to have to make such a move, and then there's no kind of anxiety. I'm sure when you broke the news, the reaction probably was better than what.
Oh yeah. So I had a lot of anxiety,
right?
And there's a lot of challenges to, I guess, manage the balance of sort of prioritizing work, prioritizing family. In Canada, I'm talking about, and because as you all must know, there's no help in Canada for sure. And so you're balancing a number of different things. I mean, I know it's usually a joke. It's like, after I finish my board work, I go and do my housework. So maybe when my family members call me a housewife, they may not be so wrong. So yeah, there's a lot of a balance of responsibilities and priorities, and obviously sometimes I do a frequent travel, like I'm here at the moment, and sometimes there's long absences, for my family in Canada. So it's not easy, but over time I recalibrated, and that's what you do, right? That's where the adaptability comes into place. I learned to balance effort with impact. And I really clarified for myself what I was willing to invest energy in. And so there's this, what I'm trying to link, this uncompromising adaptability. So I was prepared to adapt, or I adapted and I evolved.
Yeah.
And I can tell you now, the learnings just over these 2 years has been incredible for me. So it's allowed me to actually also engage. Being in Canada, I've managed to, network with some individuals, get to attend some sort of conferencing, risk governance workshops, understand firsthand some of the challenges North American companies experience, some of their challenges on DEI, as you must know, North American companies are grappling with right now on the sustainability agenda, things that they are actually just throwing out, out of off their agendas, and understand how they're grappling with it, and bring some of those thoughts and leading edge, even technology stuff, bring back to the board. So, I've used this, and I know some people might think, well, geez, why is that like not a compromise? Why is that a difficult situation? But it's difficult because I work full time in South Africa, living in Canada, so, but I'm able to now find the things that I can add to my role, which, I think just attending a podcast or listening to a podcast or attending an online session doesn't really bring to it the same opportunity of engaging with people in North America, learning different things and bringing it to my South African boards.
So obviously a lot of adapting, right?
Yeah.
Is it a state of mind? Is it about planning? Is it being nimble? What are the ingredients?
Yeah. So, I mean, for sure, it's a state of mind. It's a big thing, right? But again, so I think the point I'm trying to make as well, these things are curveballs in your life. It's how you adapt to it and how you embrace it. So we weren't thinking of leaving the country. We're not thinking of staying necessarily out of the country. So, if people often ask, is this a forever decision? We're too young and old to decide on whether this is a forever decision, right? So when these things come up, it's about your state of mind to embrace a challenge, to embrace the adventure. And I think if you get the state of mind right, then obviously things become easier. And it's interesting you say, I've got 3 young adult daughters, and I want them to also have this experience of living in another place so that they can make their choices when they're ready to do so. But I found that the hardest thing for them is the state of mind.
Right.
And of course, for us at this age, to have a change in circumstance, it's about getting your state of mind right.
Yeah. Okay, then, I mean, just getting now into the deep end of serving on boards, on a big listed company, obviously lots of tension, challenges, anxiety. I mean, what are those lessons that you want to share with us in terms of just how you deal with challenges as board, and even just as an organization? I mean, ABSA is big, and they play a big role in this market. How are they navigating, for example, even the geopolitical issues that we have? Just a few kind of top of mind things that you think we can take away.
Well, with all challenges, you deal with it in a calm demeanor. Absolutely. So, that's exactly it. Look, all organizations have a number of challenges. We don't know about it in many instances. Some companies tend to have these issues ventilated more than others. And the reality, though, is all organizations have challenges. And in a boardroom, it's about how you deal with it, how you engage with management to deal with it. And that's just usually how you get through. The reality is the new geopolitical uncertainty that we face, and not only South Africa, a number of countries, of course, as we know. Companies have to just put their sort of, their shoulder to the wheel and just deal with these issues, understand the risks. The reality is, world economy is it's just difficult to operate in the world as it in current times. I thought you were going to ask me about, maybe you are still getting there, the sort of the early stages about getting onto boards. Do you want to maybe talk about that?
That's a good one, because I wanted to talk to that last, but I think we're now 30 minutes in. I think let's deal with that.
Yeah.
Look, part of why we're doing this is there is a real need for, I think, throughput, if I can use that word. Difficult to get on boards. I think the opportunities are limited.
Yeah.
It's difficult to be in the right networks. So share your story, because I think it's quite a very interesting.
Yeah. So I think it goes back to this comment that I was talking about earlier, first about when you're on a board and about not necessarily being the loudest and throwing the most ideas around. And if I take that back to when you first want to get onto a board, because I left Deloitte and then I thought at that stage, yes, I'd want to get onto I want to be a career non-exec director, and there's no rule book as to on how you do this, and at least now also there are many platforms like this where you can engage with people, and I don't think there were that many about 10 years ago. So, and I'm only thinking about this now in hindsight, to be honest. There's no one walks around with a kind of playbook as to how you want to do this. Well, I definitely didn't have a playbook then. But what I reflected on now is that the same narrative about don't necessarily be the loudest, whatever, in a boardroom goes back to when you are networking. So it's this whole networking story.
Right.
And I have a number of people asking me, well, how do you network? Where do you network? So it's also, I worry about this, us wanting to do so much to meet as many people as possible and hope that something we throw at someone is going to stick, right? And I think that's what I'm sort of saying is this volume thing didn't work. Well, it didn't work for me. I didn't try that. But when I look back in hindsight, that's not what makes it work. It's not about the volume, it's about the value. And that's why I go back to when you're having engagements with people, it's not about how many people you know and how many functions you attend and all of those things. It's about the meaningful connections that you actually make, because that's what's going to carry you. Right. So how did I get onto a board? The reality is, I had developed over, through my, both through my university experience, through my Deloitte experience, I had developed really meaningful relationships. And I had met, we were in a social gathering and I was sitting next to a couple of colleagues. My husband was the CFO of a listed board. And so I was actually at one of his social engagements as the plus one. and just good regular engagements. And I had actually engaged with some of these individuals on a number of occasions, but on a social basis, it was a professional meeting, but it was in a professional event, but it was still a social gathering. Right. In that regard. And when we're chatting to some of the colleagues, I had mentioned that I had left Deloitte and I was looking at, for a career non-exec role. And the next day, in fact, I got a call from one of the individuals that I was chatting to, and I didn't know that he was actually a chairman of another board. Wow. And he said to me, won't you come up and have a chat to me? And he was actually the chairman of Roynet. And so my point is, it's about a meaningful relationship. Right. It wasn't about me just targeting all the people in the room so that there could be something that I could get out of it. And I think if I look at the number of individuals that I speak to, I think that's what's not working. Okay. It's about people having multiple coffee chats and connections and LinkedIn and followings and all of those things, but no meaningful relationship. Because the reality is, and this gentleman, Trevor Monday, became my sponsor, as I would call it, in my career. He's helped me start my non-exec career, and he has been a great mentor in that regard. But you can't have that if you don't develop that meaningful relationship.
No, that's a big one. So it's really about the quality and not the quantity.
Correct.
And having meaningful relationships that are not with the intent of,
Absolutely.
right? Really building a credible kind of network around you of people that actually know your capabilities.
Absolutely. Because I'm only here today. I have a meaningful relationship with Judith. Yeah. I have had a meaningful relationship with Delia. Yeah. And so these are the individuals that have phoned me and know me, and I know you. Right. And so therefore I'm comfortable to align my brand with your brand. And so that's exactly how we develop and help each other grow. It's not about just this LinkedIn contact.
Maybe then just...
Sorry.
It's so true, because I think now it almost feels like speed dating. Like everyone wants to be everywhere, doing everything, commenting on everything. So it's crazy. So maybe then just to touch a little bit about the personal brand, right? Because your brand is the calm demeanor, but very effective. That's how I would kind of summarize it. And we've been talking a lot about be yourself as a person, show up as yourself. Any kind of advice here?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting one because, especially when you do sit on a couple of these boards, you do, and Judith would also know this, but you cross paths with a number of people that show up very differently.
Yeah.
And it's very easy, and especially in a board role, which is unfortunately very male dominated. And so women tend to feel that they need to be, in order to be effective, you need to be, that's why I keep saying, you need the perception that you need to be the loudest, you need to be the one that's contributing the most ideas, you need to dress a particular way, you need to act a particular way. And I don't, just for myself personally, I am just not that person, right? I'm just who I am, and you like me, you don't, and that's okay. Then I'm not in the right place if I'm not welcome in whatever forum. And so for me personally, it's about just being myself, because it's hard to be something you're not consistently.
Right.
And
right.
again, Judith, maybe through your experience, I've clearly seen people that are not authentic.
Yes.
You see the
Bombs out.
you can't be consistently
Yeah.
like that. So it's as it is, as I've just said to you, there's multiple packs that you're reading, you're prepping, you're doing your other research. You don't have time to not be yourself. So so there's a lot to deal with. So if you just show up as yourself, and again, if that doesn't sit well with a particular board that you're on or in your work, then you're not in the right place. So that also talks to context then. So, just by the way, one of the other things is when we do go in for board interviews, oftentimes I also see that people that we're interviewing are being interviewed by the board. The reality is it's a two-way interview.
Right.
You, as a board member, are deciding whether that's a company that's aligned to your values, your principles, whether you actually want to sit on a boardroom table with these individuals. And I don't get people thinking that. They're just thinking this is I want this.
One way.
And for me personally, okay, well, maybe except for that, I was lucky that first board where Trevor Monday was my sort of support and sponsor, and it was the Roynet board, and I did join the Roynet board. It was my first board, but it was because there were people that it was aligned to my values. So I just really encourage people to remember it is a two-way interview.
Right. So coming back, before we get into questions, coming back to your topic, uncompromising adaptability. So what I've heard is uncompromising in terms of your resolve to be yourself, in terms of your resolve to serve. It's not about, the fluff. Your resolve to actually work through it. It's a lot of work. Did I miss anything?
Yeah, and it's about adaptability doesn't mean sacrificing your ambition or your identity.
Right.
So that for me is quite. It's just about allowing yourself to be open to new possibilities, holding firmly to your principles, and people read that. People see that. I am not the sharpest tool in the boardroom, I can tell you for a fact. But I am very hardworking, and I'm very diligent, and I'm a servant, and people recognize that.
Right.
And I think those are the only things that have helped me sustain the last 10 years.
Yeah, wow, that's brilliant. Thank you. Are there any questions on in the room or online? Yes, we've got a question.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. It's so inspiring. I just have a few questions around your transitioning in the workplace to academia environment. How was it like for you? And how did you deal with self-doubt, going into new territories? And also, I think I want to know, how did you know that you can lecture, without having been a teacher before?
Yeah.
How did you identify that, and how did you crack into it? And possibly if you applied for it, how did you know that you are the right person for the job? Trusting in your prior knowledge and, you know, capabilities that you know you possessed. How did you get yourself validated that that is me, and see yourself moving into those territories? Thank you so much.
Thanks. So on transition, so Siobhan, let me talk about lecturing first before I talk about transition. So on lecturing, so maybe that's also the problem, is that we sit and question and about our validation and whether we're good enough and all of those things too much. The reality is, I knew I wanted to lecture. I knew that I had a good academic qualification behind me, and I had garnered good work experience when I worked. And so what more did I need? To teach students about auditing in fourth year. That's what you need. You need to be a chartered accountant. You need to have had experience. And I knew that I could bring that experience to students to help them learn the practicality of auditing, because auditing is a different language. You just need to understand how to apply it, right? So it didn't take a lot for me, and maybe I believe in myself, and I think we all should. That's the point, is that, you know, I had the ingredients, other people were applying, other men do this without even a blink of an eye. So why do I need to have some doubt in my confidence? So that for me was not a problem at all. So anyway, I just say, just believe in yourself. Lecturing is not difficult. So your question about transition was also about academia back into work, right? Yeah. So that's
even getting into academia.
Yeah, but again, so getting into academia, you need to trust what knowledge that you have, and so therefore you're able to share it. And I actually think, sorry, a number of women that had come into academia were actually one of the best lecturers that we had seen, because they could bring the story, the narrative, they could bring their experiences into the lecture room. So that's not difficult. The transition from academia back into work, that was a little bit more challenging, but I'll tell you how I dealt with that, is that I knew that because I had taken 3 to 4 years out of the profession, is that you can't now leapfrog into directly into an audit role, serving clients, etc., because you have been out of it and things have changed in the corporate world, not necessarily in the academic world. And so I do, and I've always done in all my choices and transitions, and I've transitioned a lot in my career, I've done things in a way that I'm able to show up properly. So how did I do that? Is when I got back into the firm, I said to the leadership, I will not, and I actually joined as a partner, I will not be serving a client because there'll be expectations for me to be operating at a particular level. I want to go into their technical department first, then pick up 1 or 2 clients and transition slowly. So it's about doing things for your own success.
Right.
And oftentimes though, you would be encouraged to go straight into that particular environment. People were encouraging me, no, go straight to serve audit clients. You don't need to have this transition period. And I knew that I needed to set myself up for success. So just be aware of that for transition.
That's brilliant. Celeste is anxiously.
Thanks for your story. So inspiring, and probably similar to some of us. So I'm recently appointed as the
Oh, I must use the mic.
recently appointed as the chair of the audit and risk committee for a startup company, microinsurance is licensed. So my question is around accountability for board members, and the level of oversight that you exercise over it. How do you then balance that accountability without getting too operational in the business? My question is really around that, because to start, I normally get anxious whether they're doing the right thing, but I also don't want to be too intrusive to a point where I'm operating at an operational level as the board member. How do we strike that balance?
Now, that is a difficult balance always, right? And you can tell whether you're too operational or intrusive by management's body language. So, but again, an interesting question, because in the insurance business, when I first got involved, and Judith, I'm not sure if you were there at the time, but we actually were setting up, there were changing regulations, and we were setting up an audit committee for the first time in the insurance business.
No, that was just before.
Okay. So that's the exact challenge that I remember going through. It's about setting the right governance tone without being too intrusive. So honestly, it's about the way you ask your questions, the manner in which management are able to provide the sort of responses. And if they're obviously not sufficient, then you do delve a little deeper. What I do in those types of circumstances, there may be some offline conversations that you may want to have with management if you don't believe that you're getting the right level of responses to your governance questions.
Right.
And so, because no management, no executive want to have board members dealing with the detail, because it also detracts from your true role and their true roles as well. So obviously it blurs the lines. So I think in the beginning, it's about setting the tone. And then if it's not to your appropriate response to your fiduciary responsibilities, is then to have offline conversations to say to management, look, if you don't respond, we will be asking detail. And that's not good for you and not good for us. But it's something that you just need to keep traversing, this tricky line between too detailed and the right level of governance.
Okay, there's another question over here.
Okay, I'll ask a question. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience of a board's role in stewardship, oversight, and accountability? And then also, I'm aware that you've served on the ABSA board under a female, under Wendy Lucas Bill, and also under a male. Were the differences that you picked up in the style of, chairing, depending on the gender?
Yeah, we can take another question.
Okay. Hi, Tasneem. My name is Shanila, and it's been a wonderful talk. Thank you so much. I just wanted to, we often talk about how women need to bring themselves to a boardroom, right? How do we behave? How do we prepare? But I just wanted to ask you, in your years of experience, given that we continue to live in a very patriarchal society, how, in your experience, from the time you started, like 10 years ago or whatever, to now, how have men in this patriarchal society been receiving women on boards? And secondly, what advice would you give, particularly to young women who are getting onto these boards, around red flags? What are red flags in these boardrooms? Because, often young women don't have that level of experience or that, confidence or that, acquired demeanor and, that women that are more experienced have. So maybe just flipping it and talking a bit about what should we look out for in men's behavior on boards. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want to this?
Thanks, Tasneem. My name is
Testing me now.
One more.
My first question, I just want to understand, I think, the role of a board, right? So in an organization, I think we've seen that when CEOs change, the strategy changes, but the board approved the strategy. So what's their role in ensuring sustainability of the organization? That's the first part. And the second part, I think, as a young woman trying to get onto boards, you're always advised, start with NGOs. So you do that, and NGOs have zero structure. So you're trying to learn about an environment that's very unstructured. And I don't always feel that I get the best experience because you're trying to figure it out all together. So what would you advise in terms of what's the best way to gear oneself up for success as a board member in that environment?
Yeah. So if I just I think all of you are sort of asked about the role of the board in terms of stewardship, accountability, governance. And to be honest, that's so well governed and regulated in terms of charters, or if you're in a regulated entity like us, like a bank or insurance, microinsurance, or there's enough regulations that kind of support that or guide that But just so if I want to link some of what Delia's asked in terms of your comment about the CEO strategies, etc. So I mean, part of what a board in terms of stewardship and accountability and governance over strategy is usually, I mean, management present a strategy, which the board check and challenges and then approve. But it's not a board designed strategy. So therefore, and usually when, there are transitions and changes, it's ideal that the strategy doesn't change dramatically. And to be honest, most organizations should not have changing strategies on a year-on-year basis. There may be tweaks to it. There may be enhancements. There may be focuses. I mean, like now, even with all this macro uncertainty, Judith, that you raised as well, there's going to be tweaks to everyone's strategy, but it's not going to be an overhaul of a strategy. I mean, you shouldn't be expecting that in any organization. So kind of that's where, and that's part of the stewardship and governance that the board needs to ensure, that you're not changing strategy every year or 2 years, because it's quite unsettling for a well-established organization. So that's kind of what a board needs to ensure. Just in terms of this patriarchal society and how men receive women on board and the red flags, that's a very interesting question. And I can tell you that most certainly you see red flags, right? So firstly, you get men that are sometimes dismissive of the woman on the board. They think you're just there to meet the diversity and BE requirements. And so you're just there for a tick box. And so therefore everything that you say, not everything, but a lot of what you say is not valuable. And so therefore if you say one thing or nothing on the board, that's okay. So you do get boards that function like that. So, there again, and that's why I talked earlier about when you have meaningful relationships, and then you obviously want to have the meaningful relationship with your chair and your lid so that you can call out these behaviors earlier on. But actually, you shouldn't even be in that situation in the first place, because as I said to you earlier, it's a two-way interview. You can clearly see in your interview what the culture of that board is. And trust me, all boards have different cultures. Even if they change over time, people come and people leave, the board culture somewhat still stays the same. So when you're doing your interview, it's not whether they're choosing you, it's whether you are choosing that particular board, because it's your brand that obviously will follow that particular, I guess, appointment. So part of this red flag is about this, how dismissive men are. And like I said, you'll be able to tell that when you're being interviewed, whether what you say is actually being listened to. So I guess, but though, having said all of that, you may get one or two men that may behave like that, not necessarily all men. So then it's about, and I think these are lessons about, firstly, how you develop your EQ, about how you learn to land a message. I mean, there's an art in all of these things. So you don't just say what you want to say on a board. You think about how it's going to land with management. You think about how it's going to land with your fellow board members. You think about what outcome you actually want to achieve by landing that particular question or message or idea or thought. I mean, Judith, you asked about sort of the background work that goes into these things. That's part of it. Honestly, when I first started my boards, I actually would have a list of questions that I would ask based on the material that I read. Then I'd add to it based on what conversations we're having in the boardroom. And then I'd discount my questions based on the questions that the sort of board members have asked. And then you learn which messages amongst your board members land a bit better than the other board member. And that's how you kind of evolve in your, I guess, sophistication of landing the right meaningful question. Because sometimes in a section, and we may have multiple agenda items, you may have an opportunity to land one question only in each agenda item. So you want that to be the most meaningful thing. The NGO question. So it is an interesting one. And, and I know people have often complained to me about the same issues, that, we've been asked to do an NGO. And I think here in South Africa, we actually pay people to sit on NGO boards, right? In North America, you don't get paid for that at all. It's all voluntary work. So, I mean, so it's a worldwide problem, if that makes it any better, right? But not doing meaningful stuff at an NGO. But you're right. The problem is you're not necessarily learning because they don't have the right structures or the structures that you want to align yourself in terms of like listed companies or private companies. But I often see when I interview, and I interview a lot of non-exec for people for coming in for non-exec roles, I often have people wanting the big role. So I'll use a bad example. Let me use ABSA, right? So everyone will say, oh, they want to get onto the ABSA Group board. And then we think, well, hang on a second. There are multiple subsidiary companies. Yes, there's no status. No one's going to know where you are and what you're doing. But actually, one, you join the board, the subsidiary board, for example, you are exposed to people, you network, you learn how to ask questions. You can be a 70-year-old, 60-year-old, but you still need to learn how to ask that question. So it's about learning from your fellow board members, learning about the organization, learning, networking with people. And yeah, maybe you never get asked to sit on the group board, but maybe you do. So I don't have people with that hunger. Honestly, I've never had anyone with that hunger. And maybe just a small aside. I mean, I was not appointed onto the ABSA Group board first. I was actually appointed onto the the insurance business first, before I worked very hard and not the sharpest tool in the box necessarily. But that's what I think I got then asked to serve on that allowed for me to be offered to serve on the group board. So my point is, there are many ways. That's the non-linear thing that Judith's also talking about. There are many ways to get to an outcome, but also don't join the board just because you want to get onto the group board. You know, so there's there are a couple of things. I feel like I missed
So
something.
the one about the leadership of a chair, a male chair.
Yes, the
female
male-female thing. Yes, that's right. Sorry, I got the gender thing. You know, it is interesting. So I don't think I've personally experienced the gender impact, but it's the personal impact. So yes, and I can say that because we've had multiple men chair boards, and they all bring different things. So it's about your style.
Right.
So I don't think it's a gender influential factor. I think it's just the style of people. But look, women naturally want to be, I don't know, more, definitely more engaging on things, more, maybe more operational in some instances. We tend to be more operational. We tend to want to go get under the hood more. So, but anyway, it's just interesting to work with different styles of leaders.
Okay, before we get on to this one, are there any questions online?
There was one question, but I do think it was answered.
Okay.
The question was, how do you ensure that you add value when sitting on a board of a listed company that's been operating for many years with established processes and experienced leadership?
Yeah.
And I think what you were saying was that you don't want to change the strategy too much. There's obviously.
But even on well-established businesses, I mean, Roynet's, I think, over 100 years old. They are always value-add things. So, and because the macros change, the business environment change, so there's always value that you can add. But I tell you, if I can say there's one thing you want to do to add value to a board, is you listen. Don't talk, listen, and you'll be able to add value through that mechanism.
Sure.
So I'm sitting on the other side. So I'm the management.
Okay.
I'm the executive officer of a board.
Okay.
And I think what's really important, especially if it's a nonprofit or an NGO, if you're going to sit on that board and if you're not going to be paid, you need to do as much work and be as diligent as if you were being paid.
Absolutely.
Because my board members are not being paid. And for that organization to succeed, and NGOs have as much a role and a place as do big corporates. So that's just something I want to say. Because sometimes board members who sit on those types of organizations don't apply themselves as diligently, don't read the packs as much as they should.
So there's two more questions from online. One from Balisa, and she says, as a woman chair, how would you manage male ego of other non-women? And then she says in brackets, men who are on your board when you sense power struggle. And then Agnes is asking, patriarchy has no place in the meeting, but how do you deal with unsavory demeanor displayed visibly where you can't ignore it? How would you handle that situation? And then Pindile asks, greetings, my question would be, how do you manage to keep true to yourself in an environment that keeps changing? How are you able to find your ground to not break even where you are at the verge of breaking?
So, I mean, men ego, So again, if you actually have a significant problem with someone, you take it off, you take it offline, and you have a conversation. But again, maybe I've been fortunate, but I work in a number of different types of boards, even the subsidiary boards, etc. We've never had that circumstance because you set the tone of the meeting, you set the tone of how people are going to engage and the collegiality around the room. So I think it's quite easy to just manage that outside the room. And Judith probably also it's probably nodding because we may have had one or two experiences of it, but I think it's about nipping things in the bud as well.
Exactly.
So not allowing it to fester. So you see it, you call it out, you deal with it, and you move on.
Can I just make a comment? I think what I've seen work is to try and manage those blow-ups outside of the boardroom. I think sometimes the temptation is quite high to kind of react in the moment, but I think what becomes more effective is then, you kind of get off the stage and handle it off stage.
That's an excellent example that you're using, although, it is a stage.
Yeah.
So a boardroom is a stage. And, similarly, you don't want to be ruffling anyone's feathers in a public forum because, you're engaging with each other. You take it offline to both people that are affected and the people that are actually are making that impact on others as well. Yeah.
And that speaks to the preparation that I mentioned. There's a lot of work that goes into it. There's a question there.
Thanks. I'm going to project. I don't know if the mic is okay. No,
There's also questions at the back there, but Delia is calling time now.
Oh, okay.
Should I go ahead?
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
Go ahead.
all right. Thanks, Tasneem, and thanks for the nuggets you've shared. I don't want to take you back, just I want to touch on it again. The reality of us sitting here, diversity and inclusion is a challenge in boardrooms. And you're fortunate not to have experienced the adversity of having a male versus female. But you also mentioned that sometimes as women on boards, you tend to be dismissed or your input is not as validated as men, right? And you've given us great nuggets about how we show up, be authentic self. But how do women support each other more visibly? There's this, I hate to use this word again, pull it down syndrome. As women, we tend to not be intentional about bringing other women in. And sitting here, mentoring each other and getting these nuggets, how does one, if you're new on a board, look to another woman to bring you in? If you're already existing, how do you intentionally include women so that they show up in a space where it has conducively been created for them to see past that dismissiveness? We don't echo each other's sentiments, and a woman will make a contribution. A few minutes later, gentleman makes it, and it's like he's made this wonderful idea, and then on that stage, it's just like you were not casted, but you've added value. So how do we do that?
I know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, I know many times when someone would say, "I've said something," someone else says something, and you're right, and everyone goes, "That was a great question," and you think, "But I've just said that." So. But so this thing about supporting women, I've reflected a lot on it and I've shared with you who my first sponsor was, and I've had this conversation with a number of people, and actually most people that I speak to, their first sponsor was a man. And it bothers me a lot, actually. And so I think it's about it's asking for all of us to be more intentional I think and our question whether, is it again, links back to my whole comment about status. Are we scared to support another woman because she'll show up better than us, she'll achieve more than us, and she'll leave a greater legacy than us? And the reality is, again, if you start off your non-exec career or your boardroom engagements without wanting to aspire for legacy or for status and all of those things, but just to be the servant that you are, you don't really care if it's a man or a woman that you are sponsoring or supporting. So I think if we have that mindset right and we intentionally support women, then we will get somewhere.
Yeah, I just want to add, Tasneem, I think this is the reason why we started this, because our view is that men do it organically. It just happens. And they have got the luxury of maybe being in more spaces that allows that. So for once a month, every woman has got an opportunity to listen, because just listening, all the nuggets that you've shared with us in terms of for example, it's about the quality of the relationship. It's the quality of the conversations that you have. All of those things in the men world, I think happens organically. So I just want to encourage the women here today and the women who are listening to us online. That is one of the reasons why we started this, because we have intentionally created a space for this to happen. That's been my experience. I haven't, you know, you kind of get caught up in the rigmarole of life. You're so busy, you're an executive, etc. It's not easy. And I think women take on a lot of other admin type things. So this is the space for us to absolutely do that. So thank you for bringing that up, because it actually is quite factual that we don't intentionally, and we're hoping that with these interventions, it becomes more of a natural thing to do. That it becomes second nature. So thanks for that.
Delia's giving me looks, so I'll shut it down. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing your journey.
Pleasure, thank you.
Thank you for being real. I think you should be on LinkedIn. We need to but I've taken down some nuggets, and I think just two that I'd like to leave us with is that there are opportunities in the sidestep, and also just balancing effort with impact.
Yeah.
I think as we go and break for brunch, that's just something so powerful that we can leave with. Thank you, ladies. We'll take a short break. 10 minutes. In 2024, South Africa's overall gender gap score was at a 0.79, placing South Africa 18th out of 146 countries globally. And I think we all know that while women make up the majority of the population in South Africa, there's still quite a major gap in women's empowerment. And I think today, as we discuss the Women's Empowerment Index and what it's about, it would be interesting to hear how the inroads are being made in bridging that gap. So I'll just sit and welcome our speakers in this segment. Starting with you, Tanya. Very long CV. So Tanya Vogt, have I gotten it right? She's an executive officer for the South African Medical Technology Industry Association. Tanya has a BA honors from Wits University, majoring in African literature and archaeology. She currently is the executive officer of the South African Medical Technology Industry Association, as I've said, SAMED, a position she's held since January 2007. SAMED is a not-for-gain voluntary trade association and aims to be the voice of the medtech industry in South Africa. Its members include medical device, medical equipment, and in vitro diagnostics companies in South Africa. And there's quite a lot after that, but I'll just jump towards the end for the interest of time. Tanya believes emphatically in women's empowerment and continues to work to bring this into the heart and minds of all the medtech sectors in South Africa. Personally, Tanya is a single mom with a special needs adult son. She adores her son, 2 cats, and enjoys meditation, gardening, wine tasting, walking, and finds solace and inspiration being in nature. Welcome, Tanya.
Thank you.
Then I'd like to also introduce Namhla. Namhla Mniki is a sustainability catalyst, a seasoned political advisor and global leader renowned for expertise in sustainable development, poverty eradication, and gender transformation. She serves as a Deputy Director General and Technical Lead with the Private Office of the President of the Republic of South Africa, leading special programs on women's economic empowerment and poverty eradication. She is also the co-chair of the Women's Economic Assembly, launched by President Cyril Ramaphosa in 2021. Namhla is also a leadership strategist supporting emerging leaders in Africa to leverage their personal power, values, and skills to transform their work environment. I could say so much more. There's a lot more to say, but I think I'd rather hear from them. Thank you. Welcome, ladies, and I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, our chair. My audio is all right? Everybody can hear me well? All right. How's everyone doing? My word. I'm surrounded by powerhouses and I refuse to be intimidated. So So as you've heard, my name is Namhla Mniki and I sit as a technical lead and advisor within the private office for now. in the presidency of South Africa. Sorry, I should have said. It is an absolute privilege for me to be here in your midst. I think it's the first time that I'm having an opportunity to be here. And my sis over there, Delia, is the reason why I'm here. And I really just want to appreciate you, appreciate women boards, I appreciate EmpowerWorks. And I'm delighted to be here with Tanya, who has been one of our trailblazers in the things I'm going to talk to you about. So I've been thinking a lot in the last few years about building or rebuilding nations. And I think in the world that we live in, I mean, we're getting more fragmented by the minute, but in the world we live in, I think all of us in this room are fairly familiar with the fact that the world seems to be structurally and quite systemically structured in such a way that it devalues women's contribution in the economy, period. I could say that in many different ways, but the bottom line and the numbers and the data tells us that, the value of women, I think, is welcome to the extent that it helps organizations, institutions achieve certain things, but the power that it's supposed to be accompanied with is where the crisis begins, whether it is about pay parity, etc. When I was brought into the private office of the president about 4 years ago, the president at the time was particularly worried about driving an agenda for women's economic participation in the economy, but moving away from tinkering on the edges and actually dealing with the real structural barriers that stopped women from participating. I think up until that point, we had done everything we could to talk about women, employment levels or data, pay parity and those kinds of things. And so essentially the discourse was around representation. And don't get me wrong, that's a very important discourse. But when we begin to understand what economic power really means, we know that it means women actually having access to real economic power, which means means of production. In the South African context, means of production is defined as women owning businesses, assets that they can use in the economy to invest, reinvest, grow their wealth. And so moving from a survivalist understanding of what women should be doing to women actually bringing their agency into an economy. Agency is something of a passion of mine, the really important one, because it forces us to think beyond what are the inputs and the cosmetic look of what women's participation looks like. And it begins to say, actually, we want to create open economies where women have the choice, the opportunity, the access, and the power to make decisions about how they want to engage with an economy. And that's why we talk about transitioning from just talking about women in employment to talking about women owning the means of production and actually becoming active agents in the economy and being recognized for the contribution that they make in the economy. And I could go into some numbers about what we know would happen, for instance, if there was, equality in women's access to finance, as an example. And we know that the South African economy and African economies would grow exponentially if we simply just had gender parity across the board in economic participation. So we began to do this work, and one of the ways that we were thinking about this in terms of just changing the structural nature of the economy was, how do we begin to support women who own businesses to actually participate in supply chains and value chains of industries? Now, of course, this work is quite shocking to discover the reality of the South African economy. And just basically across the board, if I could summarize it, we've got 17 sectors identified by DTIC. Out of those 17 sectors, primarily the people or the organizations, companies, and corporates that own between 85 and 95% of the market share in those industries are largely international large corporations. I want you to kind of let that sink in for a bit so that you can understand what that means for South Africa. Many people talk about 30 years having passed without us actually accessing economic power. But actually, when we started designing things like BEE and then triple BEE, The reason why that's not working is because there's no opportunity for a South African to own Coca-Cola because their shareholding is not in South Africa. It's not even available for sale, right? Like as in, so when you begin to talk ownership of the economy, because South Africa is so dominated by large, established 100-year-old companies, it's really difficult for South Africans to actually get into and own those industries, which essentially means localizing then becomes very difficult. Localizing manufacturing, localizing our value chains, because global entities, rightfully so, have global value chains. So even though we are saying women must come and own businesses and begin to participate, we were realizing that the market share they have access to is probably less than 5% at the stage, more like 1%, 0 point something percent. And then the barriers to entry are so significant that it becomes very difficult for women to, number one, get into their foot on the door, but once they have done that, to actually compete in a meaningful way. Because competition essentially means if you are trying to be a component manufacturer in automotives, you are dealing with OEMs who are basically global companies that have been running the show for literally centuries, as it were. So massive, massive, massive challenges. And I'm going to bring it down to where I see the vision and the hope with you sitting in this room and with you sitting in the boards that you sit in and the excos that you sit in, because I think that there's an incredible opportunity there. So when we started talking then about value chain diversification, the idea that you intentionally identify within each of the 17 industries, what are the opportunities for women to come in? Not because we want to fight for the pie, the piece of the pie that's already been taken, but because we want to try and understand where are new opportunities where we can grow those industries and grow the opportunities, as it were. And we began to actually navigate whether it's energy, mining, automotives are spoken about, FMCG, etc. We began to say, let's understand where are the opportunities where women can say we are starting businesses. But it was not enough for women to start these businesses. It was also important that then they actually get procurement opportunities in those sectors. Because supply chain or the supply value chain really is probably the most critical space where women and emerging entrepreneurs, designated groups, whether it is young Black men, whether it is persons with disabilities, but it truly is the only opportunity where somebody who has a small business can say, I have a chance to grow this business. Yes, I'm not going to fight for that particular market share, but I want the opportunity to grow my business and have a sustainable access to market. And so that essentially is what led to the establishment of the Women Economic Assembly, which is in short called WECONA. It is a partnership, a private-public partnership between the public sector, women entrepreneurs in South Africa, fabulous, incredible women doing incredible things in these value chains, but also industry, where we began to negotiate for specific targets that would essentially go to women in terms of procurement that was available. So that's kind of like in the nutshell, our own vision of how we build or rebuild the South African economy. So what do we call that in a very short kind of like phrase? It's essentially this idea of thinking about rebuilding in a gender transformative way. And so we use a gender transformative lens to say what is actually needed in order for us to see the kind of transformation we need. I want to kind of emphasize a little bit on this gender transformative lens because I find that it's very difficult to talk about the tangible things without being clear on what are the criteria that you are using to understand whether something is gender transformative or not. So often, and this was an amazing thing that I discovered 4 years ago when I started this work, is that we would go and see industry associations, and they would be saying, yes, we are committed to making sure that women come into industry. We want representation. We want them in our boards. We want them in our excos. We want to ensure that there's pay parity and so on. And I will confess, as somebody who formerly came from civil society and then in the public sector, that I did not find a lot of resistance in the words and the principles of gender transformation in companies, right? Like that was not the thing that met me the first as a first thing. The first thing was people who were saying, oh no, we are for this agenda. Where there was a gap quite significantly was, but how do we translate the principle into action and into things that lead to results that we want to see on the ground? And basically what we began to do as we corner is to try and figure out what are the tools that are going to help us, to help CEOs and chairs of boards to understand that it's not just about saying in your annual report every year, we support women. It's also about turning that into tangible results. So we looked at this gender transformative lens and we gave it 6 very important criteria. Number 1, you should, in a particular industry, be concerned about how many women are actually participating in that industry as owners of business. Number 2, very importantly, what is the extent to which women actually have access to supply opportunities in those industries? So essentially, offtake agreements, supplier contracts. So if you're sitting in a board and you're having conversations about, performance and DEI, etc., the question at the top of anybody's mind should be, what is the proportion of spend we have on suppliers who are women or women-controlled or women-led businesses? That's what that second criteria is about. It's about saying, how much do we buy goods and services from women? Now, here's an interesting story. And I'll tell the story about the public sector in particular, because then the data becomes nuanced, because the nature of the gender transformative lenses is that you move beyond the cover, right? You move beyond the pretty picture to actually look at the nuance that underlies the statements that are being made. So I used to sit with public sector leaders and they would say, oh, we spent 20 billion this year on women. You have to ask, 20 billion in proportion to how much overall spend? If that 20 billion sounds amazing until you find out that overall they spent 500 billion, and then you're like 20 billion vis-a-vis 500 billion. So you have to be willing to say, yes, I understand the figure, but what's the proportion? Once you've understood the proportion, then you want to ask the question around quantity and quality, right? So you could say 20 billion, and this is something like an actual thing that happened where I discovered that this big number that was being mentioned only went to 2 companies owned and run by women. And so the idea of actually asking, okay, but is this one person who has been your favorite supplier for the last 20 years and you're just refusing to change, but you want to mention that you've given her the money? So the idea around thinking about a gender transformative lens, which is why Tanya and the work around the Empowerment Index has been so good, is that it helps us to move beyond the idea and the principles to say, we actually want to measure what counts, because it's not just how many women are owning businesses. It's not just how many women are getting supplier contracts. It's how much you're spending on those women vis-a-vis your overall spend. And it's how many of those women you're actually spending on. A couple of the other criteria we use is, one of the things that has been so critical in our work is ecosystems of support. This idea that actually having a wonderful target there doesn't ensure that women can access the opportunities that are available, because there are 3 things that generally stop women from accessing those things. Either access to finance, access to the information that's needed, as well as access to the capacity that's needed. And so we have to find a way of creating the kinds of enabling environment that closes the gap so that women can know what opportunities are available, that's access to information, that they can have the funding that allows them to actually provide the goods and services that is required, that's access to finance, and that they can have the skills and the capacity to deliver what is required at that particular time. I could say a lot more, because we have, as I said, a 6-point criteria, and I know that, I'm giving you lots of information, but I just want to get to the point where I'm saying the work, the heavy lifting has been around moving beyond what we say to actually thinking about practically, what does this look like? And what are the questions we're asking in boards? What are the questions we're asking the CEOs? What are the questions we're asking the procurement managers who are making the decisions about how much money is going to women? So when we launched the Presidential Index for Gender Inclusive Supply Chains, this then becomes the tool through which we actually translate the things I'm talking about, because it actually looks at each of these criteria and it says, actually, you tell us as a company, you tell us as an industry, what are you spending on women? And it's the one thing that's going to allow us to be able to tell the story of how we are growing over time, so that really the businesses are improving in their gender diversified supply chains, but also that more and more women are actually getting those opportunities that they need as business owners. So my call to you would be, think about the questions that as you're sitting there as a decision maker, you're asking, so that the numbers themselves don't just dazzle, but what the numbers mean. And those questions help you to move beyond asking about the inputs to asking about the impact and the results that we're actually seeing. The bottom line, and I think that this is the last thing I will say, the bottom line is that our agenda is to transform South Africa's economy in a meaningful way. We know that the economy of South Africa and the African continent and globally, we are never going to reach the full potential without actually ensuring that we can increase the value and the agency of women in the economy, simply because South Africa itself needs South African women in order for it to thrive. And of course, we've seen that in the spaces where women are operating. But the work of uprooting what's not working and then replacing it with the ideas that work, I think is what this Empowerment Index does. And we're very grateful because when Ms. Delia was in Deloitte, she led the process of actually helping us work on this Empowerment Index. And now she is Wikona's champion for this transformative index. She's going to be helping us to mobilize stakeholders in the private sector to adopt it. And then SAMED became the very first association in industry that actually adopted the transformation index. And so, I mean, I think you've had Tanya being introduced already, but she's now going to be taking us through what they did as SAMED, why it is that they chose to adopt the index, but also what it has been able to tell them. And I think that that's going to be exciting just to see it in the meat and flesh, as it were. So a round of applause for Tanya as I hand over to you, Tanya.
Thanks, Namhla. So, the previous speaker, Tasneem, mentioned that how she got onto a board or onto boards was through meaningful relationships. And I think how we got to this index was really about knowing certain people and building relationships, and in particular, Delia. But how I got to know Delia was through my then chairperson, Peter Mklape, who really is a champion of transformation in our sector. He has spearheaded something called the Women in MedTech initiative. And although we had a number of these forums prior to beginning the index, we just weren't measuring the metrics that mattered. Mm. And so when Delia and I met and she mentioned the index as a potential tool, and also how it tied in with the president's announcements at, I think it was the October 2022 WICONA, right, that we need to increase procurement of public sector business for women to 40%. Yeah. This aligned with that vision. But it also aligned with our strategic vision as an organization. SAMED's vision is a sustainable, transformed, and ethical medical technology industry in South Africa. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about the why in our industry. Maybe Anita, if you can change to the next slide for me. Let's see. Okay. So these are some international, but also some local metrics around gender disparity. But in our sector, actually 38.4% of the workforce in the medtech sector are women. And only 25% of C-suite positions, leadership positions, are women. So we really have a big problem and we need to find ways to resolve that. So the index helps us to, let me just move ahead. Okay, so the index gives us an opportunity to look at how we as a sector can make a difference. Okay, but it also will hopefully increase the ability for our sector to actually tap into that 40% vision of the president in terms of procurement from women-owned businesses. So what does it look like, or why does it matter to us? So just a little story. I don't know if any of you know, but over the last 10 years, cardiovascular disease in women is actually presenting very differently to men. Yet, we've always treated it as if women were men. And so this has caused a lot of misdiagnosis. And in fact, women have suffered heart attacks that if they had been diagnosed and treated differently because they're women, we wouldn't have these high statistics. Also, in our sector, women hardly participate in clinical trials. Clinical trials are dominated by men. And even in terms of the R&D and the innovations in the medtech sector, it's men engineers who are making these discoveries and inventions. So it's not just about growing the economy, adding to the community. It's actually about how do we impact the health of women down the line. So it goes beyond all of those wonderful things, Namhla, that you mentioned that are important as to why we actually improve women empowerment. Okay. So if you look at the actual index and how we got there, oops, there we go. What we did was we partnered with a specialist organization, and that was Deloitte. And they looked at thought leadership, they looked at best practice, they looked at research, they looked at the local numbers, they looked at the international numbers. And we identified 5 key metrics. And these metrics are women ownership, women leadership, women employment and representation in the organization, women development, and women remuneration. But then we also decided that we couldn't just take those metrics that are sort of broadly really important and matter and impose them on our membership. We needed to make sure that there was diversity of opinion, that there was inclusion of the membership, because at the end of the day, they're going to have to be committed to making sure that these metrics improve and that they participate in the initiative. So we held a number of workshops with our members. We made sure that we had diverse opinion. We had men on those workshops. We had women on those workshops. We had women from different levels in the organization. We made sure that we had different size organizations. You spoke about, very large corporations, and it's very difficult for women to become owners of those. So we made sure we had multinationals. We had local companies, so local manufacturers. We had small to medium distributors. And we had this cross variety of different entities within our sector participate in those working groups. We also did a survey amongst our members. We wanted to make sure that the metrics that we were measuring were fit for purpose and that they made sense to our sector. Okay, so we weren't just imposing something that might be globally accepted onto our sector. And we did this for a specific reason. We wanted to make sure that the members will participate and be committed to the metric because it's a voluntary index. It's not mandatory, and that they would see the purpose behind it. So within those 5 metrics, we identified a number of sub-metrics. And to your point, Namhla, it's not just percentage of women ownership, it's percentage of interaction with women-owned businesses. Okay, so what is the percentage that of women-owned or women-empowered businesses that your organization does business with or contracts with? So that's an important metric to push the needle. We also looked, for example, we know in South Africa, we have the highest level of youth unemployment. So an important metric that we as an organization and as a sector realized we needed to work on was the number of women learnerships that our member companies are participating in, okay? And even the percentage of women, yes, youth that they're employing and giving a learnership opportunity. But we didn't leave out the disabled. That's also one of the metrics, sub-metrics. And there are a number of questions that relate to each of those sub-metrics. I haven't gone into the great detail, but all in all, there is a questionnaire that the member companies provide data on. It's not a long questionnaire. I think there are 10 questions in total. So you've got to make it simple and easy for people to participate. And each of these submetrics are weighted. Okay, again, those weightings were arrived at in terms of the survey that we did with the members. So we identified what were the metrics that were more important and therefore needed to be weighted slightly more than others. And that can change over time. As this landscape develops, as we improve in these metrics, we can adapt the index. So it's a really flexible and agile index. Just move to the next slide. Okay, so what we did was we actually built a live online platform that the companies can go in and input their data at any point in time. And they then have the ability to view their progress. They can compare themselves. So for example, here, this is a dashboard. So that would be my company's score. I've got a 44.919% out of 100% score. But in comparison to the aggregate, so if this was a live system, I'd be able to show you that another number would come up here. You can also compare yourself to your competitors because it made sense for our members to kind of have a target, almost like an incentive of why I'm doing this, okay? And then they can use it for their competitive advantage in their marketing material, when they bid for tenders for government business, and also for them internally to be able to see, okay, my competitor is tracking here, but I'm tracking here. Now, that's not a good thing. I need to maybe, spend a bit more time and energy on this particular metric. What the index also does is you'll see it gives you an overall dashboard, but for each of the metrics, it gives a few dashboards as well. And it's really amazing because when you kind of hover over each of these little columns, it'll tell you what your score is, your company score versus the industry aggregate. It also gives you the ability to compare yourself to similar companies. So if you're a small to medium company, you can compare yourself to other small to medium companies. You can compare yourself to companies with similar triple BEE levels. Okay, so there's a lot of filters that you can apply that made sense for our industry. So that would support people to be incentivized and companies to be incentivized to participate. And finally, you can actually download a certificate, okay, which gives you your total score that you can then use, as I said, for competitive reasons or marketing opportunities. So that's the index. We launched it in August last year. It took us about a year to develop. We've had to do a lot of marketing and advocacy amongst our members. We have tried to use a bit of a push and pull sort of methodology to get the members to participate. And so apart from internally doing a lot of awareness and holding forums and training the members on the index, we've also spoken to some of the key customers of our members. So private hospital groups, for example, and asked them to incorporate the index in the discussions they have with our member companies when they are procuring from them. So we still have quite a way to go. We've got 29 companies that are participating in the index. We are starting to now pull some interesting statistics. What it gives us as an industry association is that we can then determine where the gaps are. And we can start implementing solutions for the members. It could be just identifying how many women-empowered or women-owned businesses exist that could be service providers to our members. And then marketing those women-owned businesses with our members, something like that. When we see that the Yes Youth statistics are very low, it's implementing solutions to how do we get the members to participate in the Yes Youth program. So it is early days, but it's very exciting. I firmly believe that if you can't measure something, you can't manage it and you can't change it.
Yeah.
So this is a tool that takes all the wonderful things we know about gender parity and makes it a reality.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. That's lovely. So if you can't measure, you can't manage, and then you can't change.
Yeah.
So I think I'll go into questions, but Judith, allow you to ask the question. first.
Question. So is there a feedback mechanism from the tool into your space to inform policy change? And if there is, how has that been structured?
It's a very good question. You want to answer that?
So we were invited to present at the most recent WeCona, but I think that there's certainly more work that we need to do. I'd like us to get together. I know the minister in the presidency mentioned there was a task team that's been established. And I think we need to get into that task team because I would love for this index to be adapted by many other sectors. We need everyone to realize that it's credible, that it's not subjective, that it's objective, and that it's reaping some of the rewards. I think the fact that we didn't know as a sector our metrics, we were operating in the dark. And although the metrics might not look great, okay, and certainly some companies are realizing, whoa, I'm really low here. But the fact of the matter is before they started, they didn't even know where they were.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we need to do more to get it to kind of, entwine those threads. Yeah.
So, I mean, just to add to that, I would say that in terms of the macro level feedback mechanism, we have the beginnings of that through the mechanism of WeCona, the Women Economic Assembly. But what we tend to focus on at that level are the big macro issues. So, for instance, the fact that this is the first instrument that measures how much companies across the board are procuring from women. So internally companies might have that information, but it doesn't exist in public data. So one of the things that is coming up as a policy issue and something we're advocating for is that. And there's a few other things that have come up, issues related to, for instance, competitive behavior of companies and so on. So we're able to extract that and basically bring it either to the Competition Commission, to DTIC, or whoever the policy instrument or the policy duty bearer is in that case. However, I think what Tanya is talking about is at industry level. That's probably where we need to do a bit more fine tuning because the very specific industry issues then would be dealt with at the level of industry. So we've worked with SAMED. We've been working with a couple of other industry associations, the Mining Council, Minerals Council, AITF, which is the Automotive Transformation Fund, and we engage with them at the policy level quite a bit, but not in relation to the sectoral changes that need to translate into legislation. We're not there yet. But I have noted it down as one of our feedback mechanisms, yes.
Can I maybe add to that? So in our sector, the medical technology industry is regarded as an area of strategic focus because we contribute, it's now 6% to our trade deficit. The majority of medical devices and technology is imported into the country. So particularly we saw during COVID, our total reliance on imported PPE, gloves, masks, ventilators, etc. And we realized that we needed to change that. I mean, the next pandemic, we can't be in that same situation. So there has been a MedTech master plan that was launched by the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. So when we talk about policy, I think there is a link. I see this index as really tying into some of the key objectives and targets of that MedTech master plan, which is increasing employment in our sector, increasing skills, because one of the metrics is about development and mentorship.
Right.
Okay. It's also about growing the local manufacturing industry. So if you have more women owners, okay, most multinationals are not going to give away ownership. Okay. But if you focus on how do we develop women so that they can become owners within our sector and give them the skills they need in order to do and start local manufacturing plants, that also ties into that localization agenda and reducing the trade deficit, which is only good for our economy.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, ladies. There's two questions over there, but I want to go quickly online and also see if there are any questions at the back over there. So the first question from online is from Dilshan. She says, where can we find the information on this 6-point criteria and where can we find the index itself, I guess we can add. How can women in boards, Anne-Marie is asking, how can women in boardrooms leverage their positions to challenge systemic barriers such as unequal access to capital networks and procurement opportunities that continue to limit women-owned businesses in South Africa? Yeah, we can take those two and then we'll answer.
All right. What is it? Oh, afternoon. My name is Mavatu. This is quite exciting, and I like its noble intention and what it seeks to achieve. You mentioned that there's about 17 sectors, right? Maybe you could just tease out those sectors that probably are being strategically prioritized because we wear two hats here. So maybe one is sitting here as a board member in order to enhance your oversight and make sure that wherever you're serving, you're able to influence a meaningful contribution towards this empowerment through supply chains. But then there's also the entrepreneur hat, where it's the access to the capital is also about being able to benefit from those matrices. So which sectors are those? And when I see the stats of government is only reporting on between 1% to 6%, right, of women being able to participate in those supply chains. And then you look at the issues around triple BE, tender irregularities, supply chain challenges, fraud and malfeasance, and all the noise that is often associated with that. And if you come from a profession where it's highly regulated, you're going to want to dabble in there quite cautiously. So if you want to participate, you want to contribute, and you want to be able to access the market, but typically there's a perception of accessing government markets comes with the noise of certain things that one cannot afford. So if we reset all that and one is interested in playing in those spaces, which sectors are prioritized and how tangible and what systems and support is there to genuinely almost handhold people through that passage so that these stats can start to look a little bit more meaningful. Gonna hand over.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Welile Dlamini. I am an entrepreneur. So this issue touches me directly. I run a woman-owned business, and I'm directly affected by the barriers in our industries, in them preventing us in participating. Now, I've been listening to Namhla and the forums that have been formulated in assisting women-owned businesses. And my question is, how then, as women-owned businesses, get to understand more about Biconas and actually participate there? And also what forums like this, where you guys afford us to give feedback on how the industry is affecting us and how can the industry support us as women-owned businesses?
Thank you. Are there questions at the back here? No. Okay. So I think I will close.
There's one question.
Oh, there is one. Okay. Then after that, we'll close the questions and then answer. Close our session.
Thank you so much for the insight. And I'm really excited to hear that there is a measure that is beginning to show the impact and also show from the medical side some kind of insights that we can use going forward. So the question that I have is, do we have a measure that can also link to women experiences, to your point at the back? Because we need to tie it back to the women experiences. And with that, we'll be able to see the impact. And it can flow nicely into the policy space as well. So the other question is, do we have this reporting tool in all the reporting, for example, of businesses, where they can report it and it can be compulsory for them to see the performance in their reports?
Thank you. Tanya, do you want to go ahead?
Okay, I'll try some of them.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask you your slide. Sorry, I'm the head of operations at a funding organization. Your slide, I think it was one of your first ones where you showed the sub-weighting. Yeah, for the different, no, the next one. Your sub-metric weighting. Why is it 0% for all of the ones related to remuneration? And then the second thing I wanted to ask is there, and I know you guys are beginning, but are you considering doing any types of recommendations as to how to change some of the statistics? So, I mean, she mentioned that statistic there, the 1 to 6% of government 1 to 6% of government suppliers. So I work for a government institution, and when it comes to tenders, it's very easy for companies that have many years of experience to get the tenders, right? Because the tender process, I hate to use the term tick box exercise, but that's what it is, right? So if you take all of those different, quality checks that are required in a tender document, if you have the 5 CVs, if you have the 5 letters of recommendation, doesn't matter how amazing your methodology is, right? It really doesn't matter how amazing, how you're going to do things differently. Yes, that's scored, but it's really just it's a matter of probabilities. How probable are you to score 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10, 15 out of 15 for the different subcategories? So if you've done this for many years, if you have 20 recommendation letters, if you can, do you know what I mean? Like, it's a matter of probabilities. If you've done this long enough, it's much easier for you to get the tender, right? And then if you want to kind of circumvent the whole BEE thing and you JV with the black company with a nice face that ticks the right box, makes it even easier for you. So once the data's there, are there recommendations to shift some of those things that are those 1 to 6%, those things that are low and that should be higher? Because the procurement system and the PFMA, they are what they are. They're not going to change. And at the end of the day, if you're a Black-owned company, if you're a Black female-owned company, if you don't have 15 years experience, you don't have it. You're not going to score 15 out of 15 in that thing. Doesn't matter how wonderful your methodology is, right? If your CVs, you may have, the point I'm trying to make is that the supply chain system, especially when it comes to tenders and RFQs and all of those things, it's very standard and it's very technical, and you either have the things or you don't. So with all of the work that's done into this, how can this translate into changing that 1 to 6% to making it 7 or 8 or 10%? Because whether it's 20 billion or 30 or 40 billion that the government has given, they can't change the PFMA.
Okay, Tanya, you can.
All right. So I'll tackle some of them if I may. So where to find the index? So we have it listed on our website, but I'm very happy to share with anyone. So, happy to share my email address or my WhatsApp. Please let me know and I can send you information on the index. And really, you can take the index. The platform we developed it at significant cost. That's not available to everyone, but I can talk you through how we developed it, okay, and what was involved. Around measures of women experiences. Okay, I think that's very much an area, this is very quantitative. So it's not really looking at the qualitative aspect. But I think that, this is the index is going to develop. Holding our Women in MedTech forums gives the opportunity for women to give their qualitative experiences. So we're not doing enough with the index. We've just started. I think what I want to see is more of our members participate. You're right, we haven't looked at where the gaps are and how to fill them. That's, I think, something that we really need to work hard on, and we do intend to use the information for that purpose. Around the question of making it compulsory, some of the data, by the way, that goes into the index is compulsory for companies. It's compulsory in terms of their employment equity reporting and their skill spend reporting. So the other stuff might not be, but certainly some of it is compulsory. I think, you almost want people to see this as something that they want to do. So to make it mandatory right up front, I think might actually push people away. So that's why we've chosen to allow it to be voluntary for our members. We're hoping that, I believe that we will get an upswell. Our board have committed to it. SAMED has actually completed it ourselves. So there's that tone from the top. But why the zero pay parity? Why are there no scores and weightings for that particular section? Very good question, and thank you for picking that up. Initially, when we developed the index, we wanted to put a weighting to pay parity because it's actually a really, really important metric. It's a massively important metric. But when we had the focus groups and the survey amongst the members, they were reluctant to actually, some of them were reluctant to provide that information. For them, it was very sensitive information. So what we chose to do was we are for now allowing it to be voluntary. Okay. And when we get that uptake, that commitment, that participation, when the members start seeing that it's working, it's important, it's adding value to them as organizations, we'll then make sure that it has a weighting and that it becomes mandatory. Yeah. So that's the only part of the index that is voluntary. The rest of it, you have to give all the data. Participating is voluntary, but the actual questions and whether the questions are mandatory or voluntary, just that section is voluntary. I'm trying to see if there was anything else. How do we support women-owned businesses? Okay. So when I did our index, when I added our little not for gain voluntary trade association, data into the index, it was the first time that I had to go and look at all our service providers. And we don't have a huge number of service providers, but Deloitte is one of our service providers, The catering company that we use for our board meetings is a service provider. The organization we pay our rent to is a service provider. The communications and PR company that we use is a service provider. I started phoning them up and saying, well, how many women own your business? Oh, none. But then how empowered? What is your level of women empowerment? Oh, what do you mean? Well, how many women do you employ? And how many women-owned or women-empowered service providers do you contract with? And suddenly the conversation was changing. And people were starting to realize, hang on, this is important. And just by having that conversation, I'm saying to those service providers, this is important to SAMED as an organization. So I want you, although you might be on a zero now, please, I need you to start thinking about this because next year, if you haven't shifted your needle, I'm going to have to think differently about utilizing your services. So that's how we support women-owned businesses. It might not always be clear and in the headlights, but it's about asking the question and starting to measure it.
Thank you for that. Namhla, I'll give you a short time to just take a few questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for the questions, really great engagement. So the 6-point criteria we have actually dovetails very nicely with the index that you just saw that Tanya was sharing with you. We would be happy to share it and maybe it can be shared to everyone. WeCorner has a website. It's called wecona.org. And you can just also check out some of our kind of gender transformative tools there. I love to hear that there are entrepreneurs in the room, and you are welcome to come join us because we have 17 sectors. As I mentioned before, they align with DTIT sectors. I think the agenda for South Africa in the next few years is to essentially build or rebuild our manufacturing capacity. And so anything that is in the manufacturing space, I think is really, really important. But also adding to that, the mining sector, the green energy space, ICT, digital ecosystems, and AI, a very important one. We have a very robust property sector within WeCorner as well as tourism. And we also have textiles, which includes leather and shoes. So I could go through that whole list, but essentially if you go to our website, you will see each of the industries. The way we work, and this is to your point around how do you participate and become part of what we are doing. I think our model for transformation has been really transformative and radical because even though we've got quite a bit of public sector participation, what we wanted to do was to actually ensure that the women entrepreneurs themselves determine the agenda. And I think this is to your point around women and actually their experiences. So every single one of the sectors has women entrepreneurs who are business owners in that sector actually running the sector. So these are called sector streams, and they are coaches by women entrepreneurs themselves. And it's them who tell us if what the business associations is true or not. It's them who give us insight to what's actually happening in terms of the experiences of women. So we've had stories around price fixing, around this, around that we then in turn take back into the system and bring it so that we can get that transformation taking place or those changes taking place. So I think that system has worked really well. And the participation is free, and we are always looking for people who are actually operating in the sectors who actually want to transform the ecosystem and also to just advise us on what it is we should be doing. I understand the hesitation on public sector tender system. And I think the points you mentioned spot on, and you will not find me in any platform defending the procurement system in the public sector. That's what we're trying to fix. But I think the gap that's often not dealt with, and we're trying to get our DFIs to change this, is basically this thing around if there are people who are playing well with the system and they've figured out how to play well, we want to simply increase the capacity of women to play well as well. So that's the very first thing. The second thing that the public sector is doing, which I think I'm really encouraged by, is the idea of special purpose vehicles. So you heard them talking about the transformation fund, the new 100 billion fund, right? And the idea there is to develop a system that essentially bridges the gap of what the restrictions of the PMFA does, to create mechanisms so that it is responsive to the people who need to use it. So one of the things we have been advocating for, and we just did our submission as WeCorner to the transformation fund, was number one, essentially special rules for collateral for women. Number two, a process of pipeline development that would actually handhold women as they are applying for the funds that are available. So all of those things, I think we are using mechanisms that allow us to use them, which are the special purpose vehicles. Another one is NEF, the National Empowerment Fund, which actually now has a pipeline development system that we co-created together that actually enables women to actually have access to these tools and these products. I think that the point around women's experiences is so important, but the women have to be in the spaces where those experiences are being gleaned so that we can take that to where it counts and to the power brokers, as it were. I think the compulsory reporting question has been answered already. In the transformation fund, we've asked them to include procurement actually as a requirement in the reporting as well. So I'm not sure how far we're going to go with that, but I think that that's an important one. I don't know if there's another big one that I might have
think
I
you've
might have
covered-
overlooked?
No.
Have I?
Question from Anna Marie.
Anna Marie was asking how women in boardrooms can leverage their positions to change this.
Ask the right questions. I think that's my favorite question. Because ask the right questions.
Yeah.
I think asking the right questions and deferring to tools that exist is the thing that really helps. And so this index is so powerful because once you are able to kind of cut through the pretty face of like the data we're told and actually ask, no, but what does that actually mean? And is that about just your inputs or is that about actual impact? And if you want us to kind of like draft the questions and share them, we would be more than happy. No, you know why I say that? It's because actually the way we got traction in the automotive sector is that two of the women we were working with were chairs of boards in two OEMs. They pushed the agenda and the chairperson of the AITF was a woman and they became the champions in there. And as a result of that, AITF said 30% of our 6 billion will go to women-owned and women-controlled enterprises. To date, they are implementing, I think it's over 55% of their overall allocation to women-owned businesses. And it's women who are champions and chairing those boards who are making it happen.
Just a comment. Where are the incentives, I think, from the government side? I think everyone responds to either incentives or regulation, right?
Yeah.
So regulation is happening. Where are the incentives? Because I feel that there has to be a little bit of sweetener from the government, be it policy, be it tax.
Yeah.
What are they doing that?
Right. You want to answer that?
Yeah, so
I'm happy. It's the
Grants and incentives.
yeah.
And that's it.
yes.
Yeah.
But
And the BEO points, of course, as well. So yeah.
But actually from a procurement perspective, and I think this is where we need to do more marketing of the index, the provincial departments of health can, as part of the procurement regulations, implement certain transformational targets when they send out tenders. So they can put women ownership as one of the transformational criteria. And they're not doing enough of that. We've seen that in one of the tenders that was published in the Eastern Cape for medical technology, in fact, in orthopedics, which traditionally, by the way, is a very male-oriented subsector of healthcare and the medtech industry. You often find mainly orthopedic surgeons are men. So we have to change that narrative as well. And most of the reps, by the way, in our medtech industry companies who support the surgeons happen to be men. So I think we need to speak to the procurement officials as well. Yeah.
Thank you, ladies. I'll close the meeting. I do want to come back here again. But thank you so much. Let's give them a round of applause, please.